Welcome to the Diverse Minds podcast, where we give you the tips, tools, and techniques you need to be a mentally healthy and inclusive leader. Each week, you'll hear about a variety of topics linked to mental health, well-being, and diversity that will enhance both your professional practice and personal well-being. Welcome to the 81st episode of the Diverse Minds podcast. For March, as you know, we are celebrating amazing entrepreneurial women. And I've got a real treat in store for you today because I'm joined by Sarah Jordan. Sarah Jordan is a recognized industry leader with over 20 years digital and business experience across not-for-profit, commercial, and publishing sectors. She is the founder of Y.O.U, Y.O.U underwear in 2016. After a trip to Uganda, she witnessed firsthand the problems associated with not having underwear. In some communities, it is estimated that 1 in 10 girls miss school on their periods due to a lack of underwear and sanitary products. That's up to 12 weeks a year, so a huge amount lost. Instead of getting her knickers in a twist about it, her words, not mine, Sarah founded Y.O.U underwear on a buy one, give two model with the charity Smalls for All and has so far donated over 14,000 pairs of underwear. Unsurprisingly, Sarah has won numerous awards for her work with Y.O.U underwear, including Barclays Women in Business Role Model of the Year 2019. And last year, the business was named as one of the Small Business Saturday's Small Biz 100. And Sarah was recently recognized by Small Business Britain's Female F. Entrepreneur hashtag I Also 100 2021 as one of the 100 female entrepreneurs making a powerful contribution to society, the economy, and communities. And in addition to her work with Y.O.U underwear, Sarah is a trustee of the Beam Foundation, a charity and crowdfunding platform that supports homeless people by getting them into employment and training. For the past 8 years, she's also run a positive change agency called Bold with Annabelle Daly, which helps women achieve success in small areas of their life. Wow, we're so excited to have you with us today. Sarah, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you, Layla. Lovely to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, we're very, very excited to have you here as part of International Women's Month, showcasing amazing female entrepreneurs. So, Sarah, I've just read out your intro and given the listeners a taste of what you do in Y.O.U underwear and how it started. And I just wondered, as someone who doesn't have a background in the fashion industry, how are you able to start Y.O.U underwear in the way that you have done?
What was I thinking to me? Yes, I have no experience in fashion or manufacturing or importing or any of the things that I've sort of learned and I'm doing now. It was a bit of a backwards journey, I suppose. So I went to Uganda 4 years ago now, so 2016, and I was working out there, sort of volunteering, supporting local communities and supporting a group of female entrepreneurs who were trying to start various different little local businesses. One of them was making sanitary towels and nappies, and they were really struggling with the business. And all of us were just like, we can't see why. There's no problem with it. Great idea, great product. And it turned out that they weren't selling the sanitary towels and nappies because the women locally didn't have any underwear to put them in. And it was just like, oh my God, because it's such a basic item, something that we literally, it's the first thing you put on in the morning. You take it for granted. We just have underwear. We have clean underwear. And the impact for those women and girls who didn't have it was just so fundamental that it basically really stuck with me. So there's obvious kind of health and hygiene issues, but risk of violence, safety, but actually it was the access to education. So if you don't have underwear, you can't go to school, particularly when you've got your period. You just can't deal with it. And it was something like 1 in 10 of the girls were missing sort of 12 weeks of their education each year. And my background's actually in the charity sector and international development. And I know how big education is, particularly for girls. And it's not just the sort of literacy itself, but what that gives them in terms of access to employment opportunities, health, increases, decreases child mortality, and even increasing sort of GDP. It's massive. And the fact that so many weren't able to go to school just because they didn't have a pair of pants was something that just essentially really pissed me off, because it was, again, so basic. And so that just lifted the lid really on something that I could never put it back on. I couldn't sort of get over that and forget that. So I came back from Uganda, just wanted to do something about it. Basically, it kind of gnawed away at me, and I was continually looking into how can we provide underwear? How do you make underwear? what underwear do you need, discovered that obviously cotton as a natural fabric is much better for you, but actually conventional cotton is an incredibly polluting crop. Huge amount of insecticides, pesticides, water pollution caused by conventional cotton farming. And fashion itself is actually a really nasty industry. So once I started to kind of unpick that, it was just like, there's actually a bigger thing going on here. So from that original inspiration with wanting to provide underwear and sort of empower women at that side, I didn't want to then exploit on the other end and have a supply chain that was really, problematic. So it was basically about creating that balance from the start, trying to manufacture underwear well. And it sort of quickly grew into wanting to show that business could actually be a force for good and trying to create something positive out of what was traditionally quite a harmful industry and sector. So unusual start, but kept me busy since then.
There's so many things in that. And when we talk about, menstruation in this country is still a taboo in many ways. And I think I think many of us will have read about stories in India as well, in certain parts of India, obviously not the whole country, but girls have to sit in a pit of sand when they have their period. Nepal, there's been all that controversy about they have to go in a shed. And obviously one little girl died because the shed went up in flames because of the fuel that was used. This taboo, it's just, I don't know, is it ever going to end? And why can't we, even the discussions we've had around the period emoji and the backlash and, you can't have a period emoji, blah, we can't have a blood drop, as if it's so awful. And yet the other things that happen in the world, like porn and femicide and rape, that's okay, that's almost okay, but God forbid we talk about periods.
Yeah. Oh God. I mean, don't get me started on that one, because it's ridiculous. And why is it something that we are ashamed of? And even now, it's even in this country and this society, I'm all about empowering women and I'm completely behind this. And yet you have your period and you don't tell anybody, you hide everything. And it's like, why is it such a problem to talk about it? And period poverty is increasing in this country as well. So we work with a charity called Smalls for All that provide underwear and support to women and girls around the world. But in the last couple of years, they're increasing their work in the UK. And it's just like, seriously, why is this a need that, it's still such a problem, basically, that we don't talk about it? It's still something that is affecting women and girls in the UK as much as it is around the world. But it's meaning that they don't have access in the same way that sort of food banks and all these other broader social issues are increasing, and women are impacted at a much higher level across the board with a lot of these problems. But for period poverty and other issues as well, it's just still, it drives me crazy that it's still such a problem.
I know, and as we're one of the world's richest country and we're having these challenges at the moment, it is astounding. And bloody good period as well. I've put some sanitary products in collection boxes. So please do check out listeners Smalls for All. Of course, we're going to link to all of Sarah's work as well, but bloody good period if you're interested in supporting period poverty in the UK as well as internationally. I just also wanted to mention, the fashion industry. So there was that report, I think was it about a year ago, that the fashion industry causes the most pollution. So even if we could get households to carbon neutral or carbon zero, that we'd have a massive issue with fashion. And so thinking about how you then did develop your underwear to be as sustainable and positive as possible, how did you make the connections? How did you manage to do that?
I mean, I think looking back on it, it was kind of joining those dots, I suppose. So as I said, when I came back from Uganda and was just thinking about underwear and trying to provide that, looking at the traditional ways of manufacturing it and some of the sort of history around the product and fibers almost, and then discovering, as you said, that fashion is incredibly polluting and harmful. So I met somebody who runs an organic clothing company in Goa, and he was the person that told me about the suicide rate amongst Indian cotton farmers, which was something like equivalent to one death every 30 minutes.
Oh my God.
Just because of the spiraling debt, the reliance on genetically modified crops, then the fertilizers, the insecticides, all provided by the same company that then provides the cancer drugs that all of these, that the pollution then everything causes. And it was just like, seriously, the UN has said there's 200,000 deaths each year caused by pesticide poisoning in developing countries. You've got human rights abuses. We've seen, there was something last year about modern slavery in Uzbekistan that was around cotton farming. and obviously the problems in China at the moment. And it's just, there's such a lack of transparency, so many issues behind the scenes in how our clothes are made. And it was just something that, again, I didn't want to sort of have, trying to be solving one problem on one end, but actually exacerbating some of the inequality and challenges on the other. So we very early on made the commitment to be only using organic cotton, because just much lower rates of pollution and pesticide use and everything to produce that as a crop. We also found a manufacturer in India. So that's where most of the organic cotton is grown. So we wanted, again, to kind of support local communities, and found a manufacturer there that has the certifications around fair trade, around the GOTS, sort of organic textile standards, and also does a lot more around benefits for workers. So the SA 8000 certifications and things that just show that they treat their workers fairly. They provide meals, they provide transport, they educate sort of the wider families and children. And again, just about trying to treat people fairly through that supply chain, and having the transparency so that we know where our underwear is made, we know where the cotton is grown, we know that they either own or work with local cooperatives that are growing the cotton on the farms, and just being really confident, as much as we could be, in that sort of supply chain, so that we were making something fairly. And then when you unpick some of the broader things around sustainability, again, there's a lot more to it. So just thinking about things like ink, our printing, our banking, the energy usage, where we're getting our water from, and just making sure that all of it is having a positive, or at least not a negative, detrimental impact on the kind of people and the planet that are involved. So there's a lot more to it once I've started to look into it and started to run a sustainable business than I had realized when I first got going. But it's something that becomes increasingly important, I think, once you do know that.
Yeah, that's amazing, Sarah, just from everything, and thinking about how one thing unfolds something else as well and makes one think. Or we try and make ethical decisions and then think, wait a second, what about this aspect? What about this aspect? It's like I was I was talking to some friends that I tried to order the most ethical, I went on the Good Shopping Guide computer that I possibly could, and then it arrived and it was made in China, which I'm not trying to be detrimental about China, but you just think, who's made this?
Yeah.
And this is the most ethical option I could get for what I needed. So your heart sort of sinks. And I think it just shows we all have a responsibility to do as much research as we can and hold companies to account.
Yeah, and we all have a role. So I don't like it when it's all placed on consumers, because I don't think that just passes the buck of responsibility. It's like, well, you need to go and work out what the most ethical option is. There's so much greenwashing and there's so much information around this, and it's hard to make those decisions. And there are also compromises and sort of priorities that you need to make. And, fabric and leather is one of those, where it's like, is leather, an animal product, better than, fake leather, which is plastic? And there's so many kind of compromises and decisions based around your values and everything. But it is very much something we can all have an impact on. So we do still vote with our wallets, essentially, and every pound that you spend with a small ethical business definitely makes a big difference in terms of persuading the bigger companies as well that it's something that they have to do. But it requires everybody to play their part. So brands definitely have a role, businesses have a role, government has a role in legislation and trying to make sure that, people are paid fairly throughout the supply chain in this country. So this isn't something that's exclusive to China, India, or anywhere else. We don't necessarily have the best working conditions here either. And we saw some of that with the clothing factories in Boohoo and Misguided and stuff last year. So it's really important. But yeah, as you say, it's complicated. And it's certainly from a business perspective, it's very much a journey. So one of the things, we've made decisions kind of at every point about doing the best that we can. When we know more, doing better. And that's kind of we've even written that into our company articles, because it's like, this is an ongoing piece of work. I know where we want to go, but it's small steps, and we will continue to make progress as we get there, because some of these things you can't do at the start, and it's just trying to do one small step at a time.
Completely. And I think, you've mentioned, you've kind of given me the answer to this, but also in terms of the work that you do in Uganda and also with Indian cotton farmers and suppliers. And some people will be listening to this thinking, yeah, I've got an idea in the back burner, but living in the West stroke global North, how do you ensure partnership working and not being what might be perceived as a white savior business and, handouts and, oh gosh, you really need my help because I'm from the West?
Yeah, I mean, that's been hugely important to me from the start. So even when I went to Uganda in the first place, it's about work, supporting local communities and partnering and them being the experts. And I actually worked at Oxfam for many years, and pros and cons of charities like that. But I know the risks and issues, I suppose, of just sort of flying in and being that white savior that's got all the answers, which we very much do not have. I think that's one of the things that drove me to the partnership with Small for All. So as I said, they are the ones that we donate the underwear to. Very much, well, for two reasons. One, they had very similar values in terms of the kind of longer term aims of what they were trying to achieve, not just providing underwear, but what that gives people in terms of empowerment and access to education and the longer term benefits. But they work with local charities and organizations on the ground as well. So they work in, I think, 15 different countries across Africa, including Uganda. And it's very much about partnering with local organizations there who know where the need is greatest, who know where they're going to have the most impact, and do so in a very culturally sensitive manner, I suppose. So it's not just about us sort of coming in and trying to solve it or even trying to provide underwear. It's just about working locally to try and support, basically. So a lot of the underwear is actually sourced locally, so supporting local markets, making sure that the economy isn't impacted by a load of stuff coming over from here. Well-meaning or not, it has an impact that isn't necessarily foreseen. So I think it's very much finding partners where you have that genuine partnership, genuine respect on both sides, and going with the expertise that they have, because it definitely isn't something that we have just because we're here in the West.
Thanks so much, Sarah. I think that's really helpful, practical, and a very clear information about how you do that and how it's all really important for us all to think that, even if we're in the UK and working with various communities as well, whether it's diaspora communities, refugees, asylum seekers, people from different socioeconomic backgrounds, thinking about that bigger picture.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think it's just true wherever you're working, you are not the expert, and it's being, broader conversations about supporting diversity, inclusion, and cultural sensitivity, and just asking as well where you don't know, because it's difficult, and when you're trying to genuinely help, but you can do that sometimes in a very insensitive way if you're not aware of some of these issues. So making sure you find somebody that can, help with some of that really, and educate you as much as anything else.
I'm so glad you've said that, because I always have these conversations in my training sessions, which is you might not have all the answers. It's absolutely okay to ask. Make sure you're asking for the benefit of the individual and to help the work that you're doing. And it's also okay to go and look for answers and say, I've done some research. This is what I've found. This is the approach I'm going to take. How does this feel to you? And I think people feel very frightened. They feel that they have to know everything about everything, but we can't. I'd love to know everything about everything, but it's not very realistic, is it?
At one level it would be brilliant, make life a lot easier, but it's just not. You you come at it from a very, from your own perspective, rightly or wrongly. That's your culture, that's your background, that's the way that you've grown up, and it influences everything. And so I think, again, however well-meaning, you have to have that reality check, I suppose, that you've got that view. In reality, for a lot of us in this country, that is a very privileged view. And we just have to be sensitive to that. And it is hard to say, I don't know. And it's hard when it's something that you kind of feel like you should know as well. And we should be more aware of some of these issues. But I think that's my biggest learning, is if you're going into it with the right intention, being honest about where you don't know, where you're trying to help, but potentially aren't doing that in the best way, and finding people that can help you, not putting the responsibility on them. It's not their job to kind of educate you, but just being open to that definitely helps.
Brilliant. Thank you, Sarah. And I'm imagining there are listeners, and particularly women, who have got, as I mentioned, ethical businesses or businesses that they want to start. So how do you think women in the UK, but also globally in the countries that you've worked in, can transition from 9 to 5 employment or whatever the set hours are to starting their own business? Because both of us, we didn't just jump overnight, did we? We transitioned out of our work into what we do now.
Yeah, I think for me, that is the key, is sort of the gradual process, building it up on the side, basically going from whether it's passion projects, something you're just interested in, something that is a growing small business or sort of self-employed work. You get to a point where you have to jump. I think that's something that I noticed. I kept this going on the side for a couple of years, and that was the only way I could actually afford to do it. Basically, I needed something else to kind of fund the business, get it off the ground. And also, you don't even know if it's a business at that point. So I didn't go into it seeing it as a business. I still don't entirely see it as a business, but it is. It was just something sort of that I was passionate about, keen to do something about, that sort of grew. And it is very much about how do you continue to test that, build it, demonstrate that you've got customers, there's a need, there's sort of an interest beyond just me being passionate about this, but actually there is something there, while you've got the sort of relative security of job, proper job and money, something else coming in that kind of support you, that will allow you to do that. I know there's loads of stats around how starting businesses or being self-employed actually suits women better in terms of balance around other responsibilities, flexibility, creativity, but also the challenge of confidence, imposter syndrome. It's harder to get started. It's harder to get funding if you're a female starting a business. There's lots of sort of a reality check around this as well. So again, all of those things, starting it on the side, I think is a better way to go. For me, anyway, there's also no perfect time at which you can just sort of start your business or jump into it, because nothing will ever be right. There's just a point at which you kind of have to do it. And I think with You Underwear, it almost became self-fulfilling. It wasn't going to grow if I didn't commit to it. I got to the point where I just couldn't do any more in the hours that I had available, and I sort of had to jump to make it successful almost. I did that at really bad timing because I did it in March last year. I jumped, and then the sort of cliff that I jumped off moved, and I sort of fell with COVID and everything else. I then had to make it work. So at one level, it was the worst time, but also I suddenly had that drive, or pressure, should I say, to, I've now really got to make this work, because there's no other alternative. The freelance work that I was doing at the time stopped. There was no money coming in. It's just me. I have to, if I don't pay my bills, then there's a bigger issue here. So there was definitely that driver and motivation, but there's no answer. There's no one answer, I think, is what I've learned in terms of when is the right time to do it. It's about the right time for you. It's also about it not necessarily being 100% the right time at some point, just kind of going, I've got to do this, because if you wait for the right time, there will never be such a thing. And last year probably proved that. There's a huge number of new businesses that started in 2020 despite all of the problems. So I think there's opportunity in adversity. It's about finding something that you're passionate about, because it's hard work and you will need that passion, I suppose.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more, that you kind of know, your gut will tell you to go, but your head might go, oh, I don't know, should you do this? And I think sometimes you just have to listen to your gut and your heart and just be like, well, it's now or never. And also that phrase, and I reviewed the book earlier this year, everything's figure outable. Like, it might not be perfect solution, but there will be some kind of solution, and there will be some kind of way forward. And you do have to trust that you will make it work. Like you said, you didn't have a choice. So you had to say, right, I've got to pay the bills. I'm really passionate about this. There are people that need you in the UK and also need you in terms of the ethical and corporate social responsibility. And so I've got to keep going. Yeah.
And I think there's also that nagging. I mean, I think trusting your gut is something that I've learned strangely more by running this. It's not something I'm hugely good at. I'm definitely an overthinker, but sometimes you kind of know deep down inside that something's right or wrong, and you sort of have to go with that. I think also the flip side is the regret, which is something that really drives me in terms of not having it. Worst case, I mean, at one point I just made the decision, I was like, worst case, I've got enough underwear for me and my friends for the rest of our lives. It will be fine. I will come back in a year, I'll have learned a huge amount, and I'll have a stack of underwear. It's sort of the regret of not doing it. And if I don't give it a go, I will never know. And that frustration and that sort of nagging bit was, if it fails, I don't want it to fail. And there's a bigger sort of piece behind this, because obviously I'm trying to make a difference to other people. So I really don't want it to fail. But if I don't try, then almost by definition it's going to. So it's like, you have to give it a go. And I think you'd be surprised how resilient and creative and just stubborn and hardworking, I suppose, we all are, and women in particular. And you can often do stuff that you surprise yourself by.
All the time. It's like, I don't know if you've ever done that exercise where a trainer says, they give you a piece of paper or something, and they say, put a star on it and put it as high as you can in the room. And at the end of the session, they say, right, move that star even higher. And it's like, look, you see, you could actually do it. Cheesy, but it's kind of what you just said, isn't it? So yeah. So Sarah, you're incredibly busy because you also run Bold, a change agency, and you're a trustee of a charity, and of course you've got You Underwear. How do you look after your own mental health? What are your top 3 tips?
Yes. Well, I'm not very good at this. So it's definitely something that I struggle with, because I am naturally, I work hard. I've done some of my strengths work recently, and I've got Achiever high up on that list, and I just have a massive to-do list, and I'm constantly driving myself and probably others. So I really need to be conscious about it, I think, about that balance. And I think it's even harder running your own business because, and certainly now, there's no delineation. So there is no such thing as work and life anymore for a lot of us, because we're physically in the same space. You just can't get away from it. You can't get away from, anything even that qualifies as life, like social, is via a screen, and that's hugely difficult to manage and balance. And I'm fortunate that I don't have the additional sort of childcare and homeschooling piece to add on to that. So, but it's still something that I think the flip side of that, and it just being me, is that I've kind of got no excuse not to just keep working, because I can. And so that's something that I've really had to work very hard to try and recognize when I need to stop, recognize the signs when it's happening as well. So because I'm quite a perfectionist, and I work my backside off, I can do it to the point at which I then collapse without really seeing it coming. And I've tried to learn those signs, basically, when I'm getting overwhelmed, when I'm waking up in the middle of the night, my brain is going, or when I start to have funny eating habits or get very emotional or just really ineffective, and to try and stop at that point, because I found I sort of wasn't achieving either. I'm not really working effectively, but I'm not resting either. So it's like, just stop, take some time out, get away from the screen. So things for me that are effective is literally getting outside. I need exercise. My thing was swimming, which is a bit of a problem at the moment because everything's closed. I've been doing a bit in the river, but that's freezing. So I've kind of taken to walking a bit more and running and just trying to get away from the physical space that I'm in. I also find doing creative things quite useful. So this is one that I learned when I broke my leg, actually. And again, I couldn't exercise, which was driving me crazy because I just have this energy that I needed to get rid of. And I also needed to switch my brain off. And actually doing something with my hands really helped with that, because I kind of couldn't think about anything else. So some sort of creative activity, I'm not very good at any of them, but that does really help me to just switch my brain off. I can't watch TV and I can't sit in front of the news because that doesn't necessarily help my mental health either. So I think it is really hard. I'm noticing that myself more so now than ever. And I think when you run your own business, I looked up, interestingly, I was looking up, because you'd asked me something a while ago about what's your definition of being an entrepreneur, and I looked it up, and there's the characteristics of being passionate, always on, and never giving up. And I was like, but that's half the challenge. And I think when you're running a social business where there's an impact on other people as well, and when you enjoy it, it's even harder, because it's like, I love my job. I don't see it as a job. I absolutely love what I'm doing, and I'm making a positive difference, hopefully, to other people. And that hugely motivates me, but that also makes it very difficult to stop. And so I think yeah, basically I'm not sure I have 3 tips, because it's something I should probably be asking you, given the subject of your podcast. It's like, this is not one for me, this is one that I need help with. But I think, all of those things are important to you, and important to me, and having the people around you that, if nothing else, will recognize when you're doing these things and can help you stop and can help you switch off, all of which is really hard, especially now.
I don't think you should be so hard on yourself, Sarah, because you've actually said triggers. So one of your things is triggers. So you know that your eating habits change, your sleep's disrupted, and then getting outdoors, being creative. And I think you're right, but we don't often see our blind spots. So having our close friends or people that we know say, wait a second, I know you can't bear socializing on a screen, but is everything okay? I think there's a really useful tip. Something that I could share with you that you might find helpful is Rupinder Kaur. She talks about when she's so low, she can't remember what helps her. So when she's well, she makes a really long list. And so then when she's struggling, she looks at that list and goes, right, okay, yes, that does help me. Let me try that. That's what I've got a bit of energy for. And I find that really useful myself as well.
I think it's really true. And actually, the only reason I could give any answer to this is because I'm doing a business sort of accelerator course, and I've got a mentor on that. And one of the sessions that we did was about overwhelm and just recognizing it. And it was those 2 words were sort of massive triggers to me, because I was just like, oh my God, that's what's happening when I start to become really ineffective and fat around and emotional and eat and whatever else. It's like, I'm overwhelmed. And just kind of recognizing that was really useful, to see the behaviors, the triggers that are starting, because then in the moment, you don't realize it. You kind of get to that little bit of distance. And then, as you say, if you've got a list of things, it's like, okay, force yourself to get outside, because you will feel better, as much as you don't want to do it right now. And as much as you think you've got one more bit of work or one more email to do, in the reality, it's not going to make any difference. You're never going to get through your to-do list.
No, and you're also, very rarely are we the emergency services for our emails. Some of us are, but most of us aren't.
No, exactly. And it's hard, because I think running Bold, I know all this stuff, and I'm a coach and I've done NLP. I tell people this all the time. That doesn't mean I'm very good at doing it myself. And I think that's one of the things with having the support group and friends, is if you tell each other that, and it's like, I know I'm not very good, please pick me up on it, or check in, or do something, because I know I'm not good at it. And that, I suppose, it's the first step in trying to be better at it, but it's definitely a challenge.
No, well, I really appreciate your honesty, because I think a lot of people will really welcome hearing that. And so finally, if people want to know more about you and your work, so Y.O.U Underwear, Bold, anything else that you do, Sarah, and I'll include this in the show notes, please tell people where they should go. And I highly recommend buying Y.O.U Underwear, and not just saying that because Sarah's on the show. I have 4 pairs and they're amazing. I can highly, highly recommend them. So Sarah.
I love it when people say they love my pants. It's such a good conversation starter, if nothing else. Thank you. Yes, so our website is youunderwear.com, and we're on all the usual social channels, Y.O.U Underwear UK, kind of Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, etc. My personal stuff is usually Sarah B. Jordan on all of those as well. So, or emails. There's a big pile of emails, but Sarah at Y.O.U Underwear, if anybody does really want to get in touch, then eventually I will get back to you. But yes, no, thank you so much. I really appreciate that, and I'm very happy to kind of answer anybody's other questions or help if I can. And Become Bolder is the other one.
Brilliant. Yeah, and do check that out. So thank you again so much, Sarah, for your wisdom, your generosity, sharing your journey that hasn't always been straightforward, linear and super easy. So I think we really welcome that sort of raw and honest account of things. Do join me next week, where I'll be talking about agency as a female solopreneur. So until next time, everyone, take care, and I'll see you in the next show.
Thanks for listening to the Diverse Minds podcast. Don't forget to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you access your podcasts from. You can also connect with me on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Tune into next week's episode of the podcast, where I'll bring you more insights on mental health and inclusion. Bye for now.